So 10 things that photographers should do, but probably don't. 10! That is quite a lot to get through. So we best crack on with it. Now, if it isn't completely obvious by the environment, this is going to come from the perspective of a landscape photographer. But many of them apply to all different types of photography, especially this first one. And that is learning to understand the impact of lens choice. In landscape photography especially, there is a massive difference between all the different focal lengths that you can use and that people generally use when they're out and about. I've got 14mm all the way up to 200mm, and there could be a lot more than that on the longer end. A wide angle photograph will look completely different from a telephoto image. The perspective will be completely different and the feel of the image will be different as well. So I think it's really important to go out and experiment with all your different lenses and all of your different focal lengths. Now this next one is something that I think actually took me ages. It took me years to learn and to understand, but it's so important. And if you're a beginner, this is a proper fast track, and that is that the golden hour is not the only hour. Now I am neglecting that very statement in today's video as I'm out in the evening for the golden hour and for the sunset here in the wonderful Lake District. But the statement still stands, it is still true. Whilst the light is often beautiful and golden during those hours, it's not the only thing on offer. Some of my favourite photographs have been taken in dramatic, moody conditions in the middle of the day. They're some of my favourite conditions to go out and shoot in. You've got things like the blue hour as well, where you've got that nice diffused, beautiful light. There's a lot more to photography and to landscape photography than just the golden hours. So I've just stumbled really across this nice little scene where we've got this old stone bridge and the river's rushing because there's been loads of rainfall recently. I haven't been down there yet, but it feels like one of those areas where there has to be a photograph. Now if there is, I think it might be a great example of number 3, the third thing that I want to talk about that photographers should do, but probably don't. So the third thing that I think landscape photographers should be doing, if they're not already, is mastering the use of filters. I think they are a fantastic asset to your landscape photography, whether it's polarizing filters like I'm using here for this photograph, or if it's neutral density filters, which we use to deliberately get slow shutter speeds to capture things like the movement of water, the movement of the clouds in the sky. They are a wonderful tool that we can use when we're out and about. Now I don't actually need any of my neutral density filters in this instance. I thought that I would, but it's actually dark enough in the direction that we're photographing that I'm getting a 1 second long shutter speed, which is exactly what I want for this moving water here. I do, however, feel like I need my polarizer. Like I said a second ago, I've got it on the front of my wide angle lens here. And I'll just show you the difference that it's making. If you just keep an eye on this section of the frame, as I spin my polarizer around, it gets rid of so much of that glare and we're gaining so much detail down there. For me, this would be my first filter in my bag. In saying that, I'd never be without my neutral density filters either. Sometimes I feel like my photography career is just traveling around trying to find the most awkward places to put my tripod. This has got to be up there, but I did explore around. I was up on the bridge, I was on the other side of the river, just trying to find different compositions and just experimenting really. And this is what I've settled on. I wasn't really expecting to use my wide angle lens, but I just like the way it looks with these rocks down here in the foreground. Then we move on to the mid-ground where we've got that moving water, which is where the polarizer is helping so much to bring out all of that wonderful detail. And then the bridge is actually playing a much smaller part in the image than I initially thought that it would. He's off in the background, a little bit subdued, but I really, really like it. And like I mentioned a second ago, the polarizer here, so important. I get absolutely ravaged by the midges here. I just wanted to tell you that I got one more photograph on that riverbank before I left. It was shot in the same direction, but it was at a different focal length. But what's important here is that it was taken using a different aspect ratio, and that is the fourth thing that I wanted to talk about in this video. And for that photograph, I took the wide angle lens off. I used my 24 to 200mm lens and I shot it at about 35mm. And I actually changed my aspect ratio in camera to a 16:9, and I just felt like it suited that composition much better. And that's the crux of it really. I do think certain compositions are suited to different aspect ratios, whether you do it in camera like I just did, or you change the crop when you get home. And yeah, I think the main message is don't feel like you're stuck to a traditional 3:2 aspect ratio. I love a 3:2 to be honest, but I love experimenting with square crops and 16:9s, and actually when I'm in a portrait orientation, I think I now prefer shooting in a 4:5 crop. I feel like it just suits that orientation much better. I feel like I might grab a quick image of this gate here before we move on. Now the fifth thing that I wanted to talk about is really obvious if you do it already, and really important to understand if you don't. And that is use your histogram to gauge your exposure. You don't want any loss in shadow detail in your images, and you certainly don't want any overexposed areas. And learning to use your histogram and understand what it means is the best way to make sure none of that happens. It is so easy to use it, but I still see a lot of photographers, a lot of beginner photographers that don't use it, and they maybe use the brightness of their LCD screen to try and gauge the brightness or the exposure of their image, which is really bad. Learn how to use it. It's proper easy, and it will be a massively important tool for your photography going forward. Now next up is perhaps another simple one, but it's something that I definitely didn't used to do as a beginner photographer, and that is going out and embracing bad weather conditions, adverse weather. Think snow and rain and fog and stormy skies. Like I mentioned before when we were talking about the golden hour, those sorts of conditions are my absolute favourite. If you watch me regularly, you will know how much I love being out in them. But yeah, if you're a beginner, you might think, like I mentioned before as well, it's all about the golden hour and there's no other conditions to go out in your camera with. But trust me, they are amazing for photography. You get some spectacular light, you can get some really unique photographs as well. Definitely go out and try it if you haven't already. Get out in the rain, get out in the snow, and get out in the fog. So a lot of you may recognise this scene in this direction. I actually got an image, I'll put it up on the screen here, as a battle against the midges. I got this about a month ago, and I'm actually going to take a photograph that's going to be really similar, but I think it's just going to be that little bit better because the conditions are really nice. I've got some heather down here on the left hand side, and yeah, I just think it's a little bit better. Now, before I show you it, I wanted to talk about the seventh thing that I think a lot of photographers do not do, and that is being really subtle with your edits. We're going to have to walk and talk so the midges aren't crawling all over me, man. This is carnage. But yeah, post-processing, it can be really easy to go proper heavy-handed on your images, and perhaps it's a bit of a phase when you're a beginner photographer, but generally speaking, too much saturation, too much contrast, too much sharpening, these sorts of things could just make your images look really sickly. And unless you're going for that look, of course, if that's your thing, if that's your style, that's a completely different story. But try not to over edit your images. And I'd like to show you this photograph here in a raw format, completely unedited, untouched, and then my enhanced version. that I'll play around with a little bit in Lightroom. I can tell you now, it'll take me probably about 5 minutes to edit it, and there certainly won't be any oversaturation or over sharpening or anything like that. Let me know down in the comments what you think. So I'm just heading back down this way, and you can see around about there's just a really old looking building. So I'm going to go and inspect. Loads of nice dry stone walls, the heather's looking wonderful, nice views, nice sky, and see if there's a photograph there. Now, as we were just on the subject of post-processing a second ago, I wanted to talk about thing number 8 that I don't see photographers do enough of, and that they probably should. Although maybe this one's a bit unfair, I don't know. Comment below, let me know what you think. And that is learning how to exposure blend. In landscape photography, there are so many occasions where we've got dark shadows and bright highlights at the same time. Yes, modern cameras are absolutely fantastic at dealing with high dynamic range scenes and situations, but if you learn how to exposure blend, you'll be able to deal with any dynamic range. And it's probably one of the daftest things that people can come out with, one of the daftest statements. But once you know how to do it, it's proper easy. And I really hope you know what I mean by that. Learn how to do it. You'll have it for life. It's a really important post-processing skill, in my opinion. And again, another brilliant tool for landscape photographers especially. So I thought I was going to end up being right close to the house. It looks like an old abandoned house, I'm not too sure. Farmstead maybe, but I've actually stayed a little bit further back. Again, I just want to incorporate some of this heather. We've got a couple of really nice parallel dry stone wall here with some lovely gates. There's a nice tree as well to give us some balance. I like the pathway that we're stood on that just leads down into the scene, into the house, and it just feels right from this perspective. I'm shooting it as a panorama, that's why you're seeing it in a portrait orientation here, and I just think that it all suits. So actually, just quickly before I show you this photograph, I've got a little bit of a bonus thing that I feel like photographers should do if they don't already, and that is to set up back button focus on your camera. It's really easy to do. It's very subjective as well. It depends on your technique, it depends on the type of photography you're doing, it depends how you want to friggin' focus, but for me, it's a little bit of a no-brainer. And I'll zoom in here so I can try and show you what I mean. All it is this AF on button, on my camera at least, essentially becomes my focus button. The only job that that button has is to focus, whereas my shutter button has one job, and that is to take photographs. So it separates my shutter button from my focus completely. And it means that when I go to take an image with the shutter button, I'm not going to knock or affect the focus or anything like that. For me, it's really important. It's an important part of my on-location workflow. It's something that you can just set up within your camera settings, within the menu systems. And actually, whenever I get a new camera, it's one of the first things that I set up within the menus, and then it stays on forever. So I hope you like this image of the old farmstead. And after that little monologue, I hope it's in focus. So we've got 2 more, and one of them, which I'll get to last, is A, something that I never talk about, I don't know why, and B, is probably the most important one on this list. But we'll talk about that one when I get back to my van. Now the penultimate one is something that's probably quite obvious, but I mean it in a little bit of a different way. Now what this one is I guess something that a lot of landscape photographers don't have, and that is patience. You've got to practice patience and persistence. But when I say that, you may think I mean standing on the side of a mountain waiting for the sunset, waiting for the nice light, and then grabbing the image. And you've been patient and you've got your reward. That is important, but I mean it in terms of long-term patience, long-term persistence. So understanding that it takes years and years to become all right or decent at photography, or get into a position where you feel like you're seeing progress with your images. You've just got to accept that that's the way it is. And secondly, understanding that some images take months or years to get, and this is something I've learned from experience, especially in complicated scenes like woodland scenarios. Sometimes it's taken me several plus visits to a specific location, to a specific composition even, before I've managed to get the image that I want in the right conditions, and it's just took a lot of freaking patience and persistence. So we'll get back to the van and we'll talk about this last one that, yeah, for some reason I never really talk about, and I don't know why. So I feel like the reason I never talk about this one that much is, I suppose, probably just because it's got nothing to do with photography, but yeah, this is probably the most important one, and that is just to be respectful when you're out and about. I also think, to be honest with you, I'm quite a cynical person. I'm really positive, but I think I'm quite cynical. And what I mean by that in this instance is that I feel like if somebody's respectful in general, they're going to be a respectful photographer, no matter what I say or anyone else. And on the contrary, if they're a disrespectful person in general in their day-to-day lives, when they go out and about with the camera, they're going to be disrespectful. They're going to leave gates open. They're going to park like a wally, you know, all sorts of things. But I'd like to think I'm a respectful person and I just get on with it. And I suppose because that's just who I am, I don't really think about it that much. But yeah, I guess, of course, it's really, really important that we all just do our bit and make sure the sheep don't escape the fields by shutting the gates. It's important stuff, man. The Herdwicks must stay within their boundaries. But no, of course, it's important, innit? Anyway, I wanted to ask if anyone else has got any other things that they think photographers probably don't do but they should do. Please comment below. I think that would be really interesting. There were a few more that I was thinking of, but I just feel like they can be really subjective. You know, just because I do something as a photographer doesn't mean that you should. But yeah, comment below. I think that'll be really interesting. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I shall see you on the next adventure. Out.